pull up a chair, everyone. It's time for another gripping story here on AGS Stories. Family is supposed to be our safe haven, but what happens when the people we trust the most betray us? Few things can shake us to our core like being abandoned by a parent. Today on AGS Stories, we're diving into an emotional journey of heartbreak, resilience, and tough decisions. My dad walked out on us for another family, and then begged me to forgive him after they left him. They say family can either build you up or tear you down, and this story is proof of how betrayal can leave scars only love and strength can heal. Let's get into it. It was a quiet morning in their small Midwestern home when 16-year-old Ava peeked into her parents' bedroom to say goodbye before heading to school. She expected her dad to already be at work and her mom sipping coffee, starting her day. Instead, she was greeted by an unimaginable sight, her mom sitting on the bed, tears streaming down her face, and her dad packing a suitcase. "Dad, are you going on a work trip?" Ava asked hesitantly, sensing the tension in the room. Her mother choked back a sob, her voice breaking as she answered, "No, sweetheart, your dad is leaving us, for someone else." Ava felt the floor drop beneath her. "Is that true, Dad?" she managed to ask. Her father didn't hesitate. He looked at her directly and said, "Yes, it is. I have one life, Ava, and I'm not going to waste it on this family any longer." Ava was stunned. "But what about Mom? She left her job for you. She hasn't worked in years. How are we supposed to pay for anything if you leave?" Her dad grabbed his suitcase and walked past her, brushing off her words. "Your bills used to be my problem. Now they're not. Deal with it," he said coldly before slamming the door behind him. The weeks that followed were devastating. Ava's mom took whatever temporary jobs she could find, but the money was barely enough to scrape by. Bills piled up, groceries grew scarce, and some nights Ava went to bed with an empty stomach. Worst of all, she missed her dad despite what he had done. At school, Ava put on a brave face, but at home, she couldn't escape the overwhelming reality of their new life. The person who was supposed to protect and support them had chosen to walk away. Was she wrong to hate him for it? Or was she wrong for still loving him? Ava found herself asking the same question every day. Is it right to cut him off forever? The days after my father left were the hardest of my life. Every corner of our house felt emptier without him, not just because he was gone, but because his absence reminded us of what we had lost. My mom tried her best to shield me from the pain, but I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't just grieving the end of her marriage, she was terrified for our future. The bills kept piling up, and no matter how many jobs she took, it wasn't enough. There were nights when the refrigerator was almost empty, and my mom would give me the last of what we had to eat. I pretended not to notice, but it broke my heart. At first, I was angry. I hated him for what he'd done to us, for the way he'd walked out like we didn't matter. But even through the anger, I couldn't stop missing him. He was my dad, the man who taught me how to ride a bike and cheered me on at my school plays. I kept thinking he would come back, that he would realize he'd made a mistake and apologize. Days turned into weeks, then months, and he never called, never wrote, never even checked on us. It felt like we had been erased from his life. One day, I couldn't take it anymore. I wanted to hear his voice, even if he didn't have an explanation for why he left. I found his old office number and called, hoping he would answer. Instead, his assistant picked up. She sounded surprised when I introduced myself. "Oh, Ava, I'm so sorry about everything that happened," she said softly, like she was trying to comfort me. I asked if she had his new number, and after a long pause, she gave it to me. "Please don't tell him you got it from me," she added before hanging up. When I finally worked up the courage to call, my hands were shaking. I thought about what I would say, how I would tell him that I missed him and that we needed him. But when the call went straight to voicemail, my heart sank. I left a message, pouring out everything I'd been holding in. How much I missed him, how hard things were for Mom and me, and how I just wanted to talk. I waited for days, checking my phone constantly, but he never called back. Still, I refused to give up. I decided to go to his new house and see him in person. Maybe if he saw me standing there, he would remember that I was his daughter and that he still had a family who cared about him. When I rang the doorbell, a girl about my age answered. She looked me up and down before calling out, "Mom, some girl is here asking for Dad." A woman came to the door, her face twisting into a scowl when she saw me. "What do you want?" she snapped. "I just want to see my dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She laughed bitterly. "Your dad? He's not your father anymore. He has a new family now, and we don't want you bothering us." Her words stung, but before I could respond, my dad appeared behind her. For a moment, I thought he might be happy to see me. Instead, he frowned. "Ava, what are you doing here?" he asked coldly. "If you're here to ask for money, you can forget it. I'm not giving you a dime." I felt the tears welling up, but I tried to hold them back. "I'm not here for money," I said, my voice trembling. I miss you, Dad." His stepdaughter Rose burst out laughing. "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," she said. "She's obviously lying." My dad didn't even defend me. He just shrugged and said, "I don't care why you're here. I have a new family now. Rose is the daughter I've always wanted. She's smart, talented, and going places. I'm proud to be her dad." Hearing him say those words broke something inside me. I had come to his house hoping for a hug, a sign that he still cared, but all I got was rejection. I left without saying another word, feeling smaller and more insignificant than I ever had in my life. The months that followed were a blur of sadness and anger. I tried to focus on school, but it was hard to concentrate when I was constantly worrying about how we would pay the rent or where our next meal would come from. My mom and I visited my grandmother whenever we could, even though it was a long trip and we didn't always have the money for bus fare. She was bedridden and frail, but she always smiled when she saw us. "You two are my greatest blessings," she would say. Then one day, everything changed. My grandmother's caretaker called to tell us that she wasn't doing well and wanted to say her final goodbyes. She also asked me to let my father know. I didn't have his number anymore, so I called his office. That's when I found out he had been laid off months ago. His assistant gave me his new number, and I tried calling him, but he never picked up. I even texted him, begging him to visit his mother before it was too late. He read the message, but didn't reply. We got the news of my grandmother's passing while we were on the bus to see her. I cried the entire way there, not just for her, but for everything we had lost as a family. At the funeral, my mom told me to let my dad know. "He has a right to say goodbye," she said. So I texted him again. His response was short and heartless. "I already know. I'll be there for the inheritance process. Don't expect me to talk to you or your mom." When we met at the lawyer's office to hear my grandmother's will, my father arrived with his wife and Rose. They looked at us with disdain, as if we were the intruders. My dad didn't even acknowledge me. He was too busy gloating about how he would finally get the family house. But when the lawyer played the video will, everything changed. On the screen, my grandmother looked directly at the camera and said, "To my dear Ava and her mother, you are the lights of my life. And to my son, if you're watching this, I'm sure it's because you expect to inherit the house. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I sold the house and donated the money to charity. Ava, I'm leaving you all my savings because you've shown me what true love and family mean." My dad was stunned. His wife and Rose immediately turned on him, accusing him of lying to them and ruining their lives. For a moment, he looked at me with regret in his eyes. "I'm sorry," he muttered, but I couldn't bring myself to forgive him. "It's too late, Dad," I said. "You made your choice." Now I find myself wondering, was I right to cut him off completely? Should I forgive him for the sake of family, or is it better to leave the past behind and move on? What would you do if you were in my shoes? As Ava shared her story with the online community, the responses came pouring in. People from all walks of life chimed in, offering advice, support, and alternative perspectives on her difficult situation. The variety of opinions reflected the complexity of her dilemma. Whether to completely cut ties with her father or to consider some form of reconciliation. Many users expressed strong support for Ava's decision to cut ties with her father. They believed that his actions had caused irreparable harm and that she had every right to protect herself emotionally. One user, @BoundariesMatter, wrote, "Ava, you're incredibly strong for standing up for yourself and your mom. Your dad made his choices, and those choices came with consequences. Forgiving him doesn't mean you have to let him back into your life. Sometimes, cutting ties is the only way to heal and move forward. Others, however, encouraged Ava to consider forgiveness, not for her father's sake, but for her own peace of mind. They believed that harboring resentment could weigh on her in the long run. At Second Chances, a user who shared their own story of estrangement commented, "Ava, I went through something similar with my dad. I didn't talk to him for years, and while I don't regret setting boundaries, I do regret not saying goodbye before he passed." Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing what he did, but it might help you find closure. Think about it. You don't have to rush this decision. Some users proposed alternative solutions, suggesting a middle ground between cutting ties and full reconciliation. At Write It Out offered a practical approach. If you're not ready to forgive him or speak to him directly, maybe try writing him a letter. Pour your feelings onto paper. Tell him how his actions affected you and your mom. Whether you send it or not, it could help you process everything. And if you do send it, it might give him a chance to reflect on the damage he's done. The comment section was filled with heartfelt advice, personal anecdotes, and varying perspectives. Several users empathized deeply with Ava, recognizing the pain of being abandoned by someone who was supposed to love and protect her. Others debated the concept of forgiveness itself, arguing whether it should be unconditional or earned. One recurring theme in the comments was Ava's strength and resilience. People admired her for the way she had supported her mom through their struggles and for standing up to her father despite the emotional toll it had taken. Yet, even those who praised her also expressed concern for her long-term emotional well-being. They wanted to ensure that whatever decision Ava made, it came from a place of empowerment rather than anger or pain. As Ava read through the comments, she felt a mix of emotions. The support lifted her spirits, but the suggestions for forgiveness made her question whether she was holding on to bitterness that might eventually harm her. She wasn't sure if she was ready to forgive her father, or if she ever would be, but the community's words gave her a lot to think about. Ava decided to keep the conversation going. She replied to some of the comments, thanking people for their advice and sharing more about her journey. She promised to keep everyone updated on her thoughts and decisions, hoping that her story could inspire others who might be facing similar struggles. After spending hours reading through the comments on my story, I felt overwhelmed. The sheer number of people who took the time to offer their thoughts and share their own experiences was heartwarming. Some of the messages brought me to tears. Others left me questioning everything I thought I knew about my situation, but one thing was clear: there was no easy answer. I've spent so much of my life carrying the weight of what happened when my dad left. Grief, anger, confusion. It's like these emotions have been tangled together inside me, impossible to sort out. For years, I tried to pretend I was fine, but reading everyone's advice made me realize just how much I've been holding on to. I miss the dad I used to have, the one who stayed up late helping me with my science projects, who cheered the loudest at my school recitals, and who made me feel like I could do anything. But that dad is gone. The man he became after he left us is a stranger, and that hurts more than I can put into words. So many of you talked about forgiveness, whether it's for my own peace of mind or to keep the door open for a possible reconciliation. I wish I could say I'm ready for that, but the truth is, I don't know if I ever will be. Every time I think about forgiving him, I remember how he looked at me that day at his new house, how he called his stepdaughter the daughter he's proud of. The words cut like a knife then, and they still do now. He didn't just leave us, he erased us, replaced us. How do you forgive someone who made you feel like you were disposable? And yet, I can't ignore the other side of it. What if holding on to this anger is only hurting me? What if I'm letting his actions define me instead of moving forward? I keep going back and forth in my head, and I don't know how to make it stop. All I know is that the pain feels as fresh today as it did the day he left. When my grandmother passed away, everything came rushing back to the surface. She had always been a constant in my life, a reminder of the family we used to have before everything fell apart. Losing her was devastating. Organizing the funeral was difficult enough, but knowing my dad wasn't even willing to show up for her final goodbye felt like another betrayal. My mom told me to let him know about the funeral, and even though I knew he wouldn't come, I texted him anyway. His response was as cold as I expected. "I'll be there for the inheritance process. Don't expect me to talk to you or your mom." I thought I was prepared for what would happen at the lawyer's office. I assumed my dad would get everything. After all, he was her son. But when the lawyer opened the envelope and played the video will, I was stunned. Hearing my grandmother's voice again was bittersweet. She spoke so lovingly about my mom and me, thanking us for always being there for her. And then she addressed my dad. She called him out for abandoning his family and made it clear that he would inherit nothing but $1. She had sold the house and donated the money to charity, leaving her savings to me instead. The look on my dad's face was something I'll never forget. For the first time, he didn't seem so sure of himself. He looked lost, confused, even humiliated. His wife and stepdaughter turned on him immediately, accusing him of lying to them and ruining their plans. Rose was crying, saying he had shattered her dreams of going to medical school. His wife called him a failure before storming out with Rose, leaving him standing there alone. In that moment, I felt something I hadn't expected: vindication. After everything he had put us through, it felt like justice. My grandmother's decision was a reminder that someone in my family still saw my worth, still cared about me. But as satisfying as it was to see him face the consequences of his actions, I couldn't ignore the pang of guilt that crept in. Seeing him so broken, so utterly defeated, wasn't as gratifying as I thought it would be. He looked at me with regret in his eyes and muttered, "I'm sorry." And for a brief moment, I felt like I was that little girl again, desperate for her dad to come back. But then I remembered everything. The years of struggle, the nights my mom cried herself to sleep, the humiliation I endured when I tried to reconnect with him. I remembered the way he had ignored my calls and texts, how he had made it clear, time and time again, that we didn't matter to him. Any sympathy I felt was drowned out by the pain of those memories. I left the lawyer's office feeling conflicted. On one hand, I was grateful for my grandmother's love and her decision to take care of us even after she was gone. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the image of my father standing there, alone and ashamed. Was I any better than him if I walked away now? Did cutting him off make me cold and heartless? Or was it simply the only way to protect myself? I don't have the answers yet. I'm still trying to figure out what forgiveness means for me and whether it's even possible. But I do know one thing: I'm done letting him control how I feel. Whether I forgive him or not, I want to focus on rebuilding my life and finding happiness on my own terms. For now, I'm taking things one day at a time. Thank you to everyone who has shared their thoughts and advice. Your words have given me a lot to think about, and I'll keep updating you as I navigate this journey. What would you do if you were in my shoes? Should I let go of the anger and try to forgive, or is it better to move on without looking back? After sharing my latest update with the community, the flood of comments and messages continued to pour in. Reading them, I felt an overwhelming mix of gratitude and confusion. So many people had taken the time to share their thoughts, offer support, or even open up about their own painful experiences. Each comment made me realize just how universal this kind of betrayal could be. But the advice was as varied as the people offering it. Some of the comments encouraged me to stand firm in my decision to cut ties with my father. They praised my strength for walking away from someone who had caused me so much pain and encouraged me to keep focusing on my own happiness. A comment from @StayStrongAva resonated with me deeply. "Ava, you're doing the right thing by putting yourself and your mom first. Your dad made his choices, and it's not your responsibility to fix the damage he caused. You've already shown so much strength by standing up for yourself. Keep moving forward and don't look back. You deserve happiness, not more heartbreak." Other comments took a softer approach, cautioning me against letting anger take root in my life. They emphasized forgiveness, not for my father's benefit, but for my own peace of mind. One user, Forgive and Heal, shared their perspective. "Ava, I know how hard this must be for you. I had a similar experience with my mom, and I spent years carrying that anger around. It was exhausting, and it held me back in ways I didn't realize. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting your dad back into your life, but it can free you from the pain he left behind. Take your time, though. Forgive when you're ready, if you're ready. As I read these responses, I found myself torn between two very different mindsets. Part of me wanted to embrace the idea of forgiveness, not because my dad deserved it, but because maybe I deserved to let go of the weight I've been carrying. Another part of me felt fiercely protective of the boundaries I've worked so hard to establish. Was forgiveness really the key to peace, or was it just another way to let him off the hook? Hearing from others who had faced similar betrayals helped me feel less alone. Their stories reminded me that there's no right way to handle something like this, only the path that feels right for you. I don't have all the answers yet, but I'm grateful to everyone who has shared their insights. It means more than I can say. What would you do in my position? Would you forgive and move on, or would you keep those boundaries firmly in place? Let me know. Your words might just help me figure this out. As I sat down to write this final update, I couldn't help but feel a wave of emotions wash over me. Relief, sadness, and a strange sense of peace. It's been a long journey, full of painful realizations and moments of clarity, but I've finally made a decision about my father. After my last post, I kept going back and forth in my mind, replaying everything he'd said and done over the years. The way he walked out on us without a second thought, the cruel words he said when I visited his new home, and his indifference toward my grandmother's passing. It all felt like a pattern I couldn't ignore. His actions hadn't just hurt me. They had left deep scars on my mom, too. For years, she worked herself to exhaustion trying to make up for his absence. She never complained, but I could see the toll it took on her. Watching her suffer broke something inside me. I realized that forgiving him wouldn't erase the pain he caused her, or me. When my dad reached out to us a few weeks ago, I was shocked. After the humiliation at the lawyer's office, I assumed he would disappear completely, just like he had so many times before. But this time, he called my mom, begging for forgiveness. He claimed he had made a mistake by leaving us and that he wanted to come home. My mom didn't say much during the call, but I could see the pain in her eyes as she listened to him plead. When she finally hung up, she looked at me and said, "Ava, I don't think I can do this anymore. He's burned every bridge. I can't let him back into our lives." I knew she was right, but hearing her say it out loud made it feel so final. Part of me wanted to hear him out, to see if there was even a sliver of remorse or accountability in his words. So against my better judgment, I decided to call him myself. When he picked up, his voice was quiet, almost desperate. "Ava, I'm sorry," he said immediately. "I know I've hurt you and your mom, but I want to make things right. Please, just give me another chance." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that maybe he had changed, that losing his second family had forced him to reflect on what he had done. But as he kept talking, it became clear that his apology wasn't about us, it was about him. He talked about how lonely he was, how he had lost everything, and how he needed us to help him pick up the pieces. Not once did he ask about how we were doing or acknowledge the years of pain he had caused. It was all about him, as it always had been. In that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized that I didn't owe him anything. Not my forgiveness, not my time, and certainly not a place in my life. For so long, I had been carrying the weight of his betrayal, hoping for an apology that would somehow make it all better. But now I understood that no apology could undo the damage he had done. Letting him back in would only reopen old wounds, and I wasn't willing to sacrifice my peace for someone who had shown me time and time again that he didn't value me. When I finally responded, my voice was steady. "Dad, I can't do this anymore," I said. "You left us when we needed you most, and you've never taken responsibility for that. I'm glad you're sorry, but your apology doesn't erase what you did. I've spent years trying to heal from the pain you caused, and I won't let you back into my life just so you can feel better about yourself. I hope you find peace, but I can't be a part of your life anymore." He was silent for a long moment before finally saying, "I understand." There was a sadness in his voice, but I didn't let it sway me. For once, I was standing up for myself and putting my own needs first. After I hung up, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own story. My dad's choices no longer defined me. I wasn't the abandoned daughter, the girl who was always waiting for her father to come back. I was just Ava, strong, independent, and ready to move forward. Since that conversation, I've found a sense of closure I didn't think was possible. My mom and I have grown closer than ever, and I've been focusing on building a future that makes me happy. Cutting my dad out of my life wasn't an easy decision, but it was the right one for me. It's taught me the importance of setting boundaries and prioritizing my own mental health, even when it's difficult. To anyone who might be going through something similar, I want you to know this. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to set boundaries, even with people who are supposed to love you. Forgiveness is a personal choice, and it's okay if you're not ready, or if you never get there. What matters most is doing what's best for you and the people who truly support you. I'm so grateful to everyone who has followed my story and shared their thoughts along the way. Your words have meant more to me than I can say. Thank you for reminding me that I'm not alone and for helping me find the strength to move on. As Ava's story comes to a close, there are so many lessons we can take away from her journey. It's a story about heartbreak, resilience, and the tough choices we sometimes have to make to protect ourselves. Her experience reminds us that betrayal doesn't just break trust, it reshapes families and forces us to confront painful realities about the people we love. One of the most powerful lessons in Ava's story is the importance of self-respect and boundaries. Ava's father didn't just leave. He abandoned his responsibilities and made it clear that his new life was more important than his old one. In situations like this, it can be tempting to hold on to the hope that the person will change, that they'll come back and make things right. But Ava's decision to set firm boundaries shows us the value of prioritizing our own well-being, even when it's hard. It takes strength to say, enough is enough. And Ava's story is a testament to the power of standing up for yourself. Another key takeaway is the complex nature of forgiveness. Ava struggled with the idea of forgiving her father, not because he deserved it, but because she wondered if it would help her heal. Forgiveness is deeply personal, and Ava's story shows us that it's not always about the other person. It's about finding peace within yourself. Whether or not Ava chooses to forgive her father someday, her journey makes it clear that forgiveness should only happen when it serves the person offering it, not the one seeking it. Finally, Ava's story reminds us that healing is possible, even in the face of betrayal. While her father's actions created a rift in their family, Ava and her mother found strength in each other. They didn't let his abandonment define them. Instead, they rebuilt their lives on their own terms. This is a powerful reminder that even when someone hurts us deeply, we have the ability to rise above it and create a better future. Now, it's your turn to reflect. What would you have done in Ava's situation? Would you have forgiven her father, or would you have made the same decision to walk away? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If Ava's story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the AGS Stories channel. Your support helps us share more heartfelt stories like this one, and who knows, the next story might be exactly what you need to hear. Thank you for being a part of this journey, and we'll see you in the next story.